Hey everyone, I've always been really interested in what personal gaming and workstation specs the big tech creators have. Do they game on Razer laptops or use old school CRT monitors? Well, yes they do. I know that because I emailed a bunch of my favourite creators and I had some really interesting replies. So we'll look at all of these creators' specs in this video, and you'll also be able to see whether your personal computer is more powerful than theirs. So we start off with Andy from Salem Techsperts, who was the first person to reply, and basically they are waiting for the X3D chip from the 9000 series to upgrade everything, but right now they have an AM4 CPU, the 5800X CPU, which is slightly undervolted as we'll look at later. He's also got some really fast DDR4 RAM, an RTX 4090, which they've built the system around for future-proofing reasons, and Andy describes it as a bit of an investment. The motherboard is X570, so it offers more features and more PCI Express lanes than the B550 variant, and the case is Thermaltake, maybe from 2015. It's got no side panel, and cable management isn't something Andy's worried about because temperature's low, and that's all that matters to Andy, and that makes perfect sense. I'm actually fairly similar when it comes to cable management. It's always more of an afterthought in my mind. So all in all, a really good build that'll do great for both video editing and gaming. When we look at storage, there's then 3TB of NVMe in the native slots. You've got the 12TB hard drive as well. But here's where things get super interesting, because Andy's invested in 16TB of data center SSD via a U3 to PCI Express NVMe adapter, and this is not a cheap thing to go for, but Andy says that when you're doing content, every second counts for transferring 4K content, and this apparently makes a night and day difference for their video editing. In terms of the monitor situation, Andy mainly uses a 27-inch LG 4K OLED with a really high refresh rate. They have tried a substandard widescreen monitor, but in general they just go back to the LG one, and to be honest, that makes perfect sense. That is a absolutely brilliant monitor. So this monitor will be great for both video editing and also gaming, of course. And the whole email from Andy, which I really appreciate this level of detail, it's full of absolute gems, so I'll put it on screen now, but feel free to pause because it'll only be on screen for a few more seconds. And next we come to Iceberg Tech, and this was a really cool upgrade that they done only a couple of months ago, and it's a no RGB build, but it's just packed full of really good hardware. It's a really good 12-core CPU, the Ryzen 7900 with the X3D variant, so particularly good for gaming. It's got 48 gigs of DDR5 RAM, running at 6400 MHz, so really fast. The GPU is high-end as well, and again an X670 motherboard, so slightly better than the B variant. They also housed everything in a Fractal Design North case, a really nice looking build. But most of the hardware, other than case and the cooler, was actually sent to Iceberg Tech. And actually you can see the old computer specs weren't too bad, you know, a mid-range CPU and a high-end GPU. But the big bit of this sponsorship was the old desk and chair that Iceberg Tech had wasn't really suitable, so FlexiSpot sent them a really nice standing desk and chair that you can check out in the build video because it's a massive upgrade. So you might be thinking they're doing all their gaming on this, right? Well no, actually they do most of their gaming on a Razer Blade 2020 laptop, and as you can see from the quote, it handles most modern games, but it is noisy and quite hot. And the laptop itself has a Core i7 Intel CPU and an RTX 2060, so it's actually not a bad laptop, and it's only 4 years old. But you might be thinking it's a bit odd to have this really powerful desktop computer and then do most of the gaming on a Razer laptop. But I think the reason for that is, and I've done it myself, if you're on a computer editing all day, when you run a game, you actually want to come away from that, so I can kind of understand what Iceberg Tech is thinking here. And then we come to Toasty Bros with Matt and Jackson, and Jackson's specs are on screen now. So an 8-core Ryzen CPU from AM4, of course, 32 gigs of DDR4 RAM, and an NVIDIA RTX 4070 Super. And actually Matt said to me that they take pride in not overspending on their builds, and as a result they do that for their own rigs as well. And actually I can speak from experience that this sort of build is absolutely fine for video editing and everything you throw at it. Matt's build is then very similar. An RTX 4070 Ti, not a Super but a Ti, so slightly more powerful, and Matt mentioned to me that M4 is still holding on fine. They have no issues with it. And again, I've got a workstation computer which is AM4, the 5900X, and it works absolutely fine for me, so I totally get this too. In terms of the two GPUs, Daniel Owen, who will look at their specs later on in this video actually, done a great video that shows that the Ti is around 10% better at max, but there's not that much difference between it. So really Matt and Jackson from Toasty Bros have fairly similar builds with the 8-core Ryzen CPU, 32 gigs of RAM, and then fairly similar GPUs as well. So that wraps up the first three creators we've looked at, and as you can see so far, AMD rules supreme when it comes to CPUs. So the RAM and the GPU vary, but the CPU does not. And I haven't handpicked 3 AMD based creators, to begin with, and the next creator we'll look at will actually use an Intel CPU. But I think when it comes to why AMD is ruling supreme for video editing and for gaming, they just tend to offer a lot of bang for your buck at each different price point. And now we come to Steve from Random Gaming in HD that has an Intel Core i5 CPU, the 12th Gen 1, 32 gigs of DDR4 RAM running at 3200 MHz, and an NVIDIA RTX 4060. And a fairly decent motherboard and PSU, but nothing super expensive either. And Steve mentioned that they've changed their CPU quite a lot, but they've always ended up coming back to this particular one because it just works well for them. In terms of the monitor, you're looking at a 24-inch monitor from Samsung. It's 1080p, 75Hz refresh rate, and bought years ago, but actually it works perfectly well, and why change what you don't need to change? Unfortunately, Steve doesn't have that much time for personal gaming anymore and actually spends a lot of time video editing and obviously doing the gaming benchmarks and their own videos. They edit in DaVinci Resolve and the system works fine for them, and I totally get that. I used to use Premiere Pro, which was a lot laggier, but DaVinci Resolve runs perfectly fine. So I can imagine that this simple functional build, as Steve describes it, would work absolutely fine. I could totally see that. But next we come to Fabio from Ancient Gameplays, who's gone a different route and has a super powerful 16-core Ryzen CPU, 32 gigs of DDR5 RAM, and a really good GPU as well. And then the motherboard is an ASRock B650, so not the X variant, but this motherboard would be absolutely fine, and then a really powerful PSU to top it all off. And that is Fabio's test rig, and they use a KTC 42-inch OLED monitor for both their gaming and their editing and things like that. It's got a super low refresh rate, quite a high hertz as well, 138 hertz, and it's a pretty good monitor overall and has KVM support and everything else. It's a really nice monitor. But then obviously Fabio has multiple builds due to all the benchmarking they do. So we looked at their test rig, but this is actually their main rig. And obviously it's got that 48 gigs of DDR5 RAM, an 8-core Ryzen CPU, the 9700X, and then the GPU, Fabio switches between the RTX 4080 and the RX 7900 XTX, the most powerful one that AMD do, and Fabio uses both of them. But this is for the main rig where editing is done and things like that. Now we come to Tobias from TechLab UK, who again has multiple builds, and this one is used for gaming and streaming. So it's got 14th gen Intel CPU, which hasn't yet melted. Kidding, no, really powerful CPU, 32 gigs of DDR5 RAM from Corsair Dominator. It's then got the NVIDIA RTX 4060 GPU, and obviously the motherboard and the PSU are fairly good as well, as you can see. Then we come to the editing rig, and this actually has an AM4 CPU, the 12-core 5900X, 64 gigs of DDR4 RAM, a fairly mid-range GPU, and then the motherboard and PSU as well. And this is actually quite interesting because this is for editing, and yet it uses an AMD CPU. But yet conventional wisdom, as I've mentioned earlier on, conventional wisdom is that Intel CPUs are usually better for video editing because they have QuickSync technology, and Puget Systems are fairly well known in this space, and they mention that Intel are usually best for the most common type of media. You might think that in some ways you should flip these builds and have the Ryzen system for the gaming and then the Intel CPU for the editing rig, because that will benefit from QuickSync. But in my own experience, and I have the same CPU, the 5900X in my workstation and editing rig, I don't actually feel like I'm lacking anything with Ryzen. The QuickSync would offer slightly better performance, but not that much, to be honest. And then you come to the RAM usage, and you've got 32 gigs in some of the builds, 48 gigs in others, and then 64 gigs a couple of times as well. And I've actually got 64 gigs in my workstation and editing computer, but to be honest, I don't tend to use more than around 30 to 40 gigs of RAM. So while 32 gigs might not be enough for me in every single case, 48 gigs certainly would be. And next we come to Just Josh, who are naturally a specialist laptop review channel, and as they mentioned, they use laptops for everything, which makes sense. If they stopped rolling the cameras and then started using desktops, that would be a bit strange. So they have lots of different laptops, but the three that they use the most are the ZenBook Pro and the Strix Scar from Asus, and then they got MacBook Pro, or two actually, one with an M2 Max chip and one with an M3 Max chip. And at the end of all their videos they list what laptops they use, and the ones we just mentioned are used for the heavy lifting, the video editing, and then for the lighter things like the thumbnails and the script research, that's done on Ultras and Airs and things like that. which makes sense. So if we look at the Asus ZenBook Pro, it's an absolutely amazing laptop. I've considered getting this myself. It's got a really good CPU and an RTX 4080, and the screen is absolutely brilliant. It's an amazing OLED touchscreen and really good, and the ZenBook Pro just has some brilliant design. Then we've got the Strix Scar, which is more of a thick boy, to use the wrong term. This houses more powerful hardware, so slightly more powerful CPU and obviously the RTX 4090, and both the CPU and the GPU run at quite a high speed. And the screen is still pretty good with a really high refresh rate, but it's not quite as good as the ZenBook. Then obviously we got the MacBook Pros, and to be honest, I don't know much about Apple or Apple Silicon or anything like that, but I know that the M3 Max is slightly better than the M2 Max. But let's move on to stuff I know more about. Most people at Just Josh use the laptop keyboards themselves, but Josh sometimes gets out the Razer Huntsman V2, which is a really nice keyboard, and uses that alongside obviously the laptop. When it comes to the mice, they don't tend to use the trackpads. Instead, they got really nice Logitech Lightspeed mice, the G903s, which are really good, really powerful mice, so it makes sense they use that instead of the little trackpad. And then for video editing, they have 27-inch 4K monitors, 850 series, and actually these have some really good color gamuts and things like that, and they're more designed for graphics design and video editing than gaming. And next up we come to Adam from Mr. Yeaster, and the specs are really powerful. It's one of the more powerful builds we've looked at, so really nice Lian Li case and the all-in-one cooler, 32 gigs of DDR5 RAM, then the best GPU that AMD currently sells, and a really powerful 16-core Ryzen CPU. In terms of the storage, it's got 2TB M2 NVMe drive, and then some 6TB hard drives, which makes sense for video editing. You can probably do that on the main M2 drive, then move over to the hard drive for more cold storage. Then if we check out the monitor specs, they're both Samsung Odyssey, so the main one that Adam uses is a 32-inch OLED, which is a really nice monitor all around, just really nice low refresh rate, really nice color gamuts and things like that, and obviously lots of I/O as well. And then for the secondary display, more of the same, but the 27-inch G6 instead. But again, it's OLED, very good refresh rate, so it makes sense to combine these two together and have a really nice two-monitor setup. And Adam mentioned to me that they were a bit of an AMD fan. Whenever they've gone to spec out a build, they've usually just ended up with AMD due to the cheaper price points, which I totally get. I found that as well. Even if Intel is technically better for video editing, you just get so much more with AMD in many cases. Next up, we come to Daniel Owen, and the specs are on screen now. They got multiple builds, but the main ones would be the benchmarking system with the X3D chip from the 7000 series, and then an RTX 4090 to make sure nothing is bottlenecked. And then for editing and streaming and things like that, they've got a 16-core CPU from the AM4 series and an RTX 4080, because that doesn't need to be quite as powerful, but obviously still that's a very powerful setup overall. In terms of gaming, Daniel does more personal gaming than some of the other creators we've spoken to. Daniel does a lot of gaming on the Steam Deck, and then also sneaks a mini PC with an RTX 4060 into their workplace. I have a theory here. Daniel is a teacher, so could Daniel be sneaking in his mini PC with an RTX 4060 so that he can do gaming on his lunch break with the overhead projector? I don't know, I haven't asked him because I don't want to spoil the illusion if he says no, but for now I'm going to think that he does actually do that in his lunch breaks, which would be pretty cool if so. Finally, we come to Logan from Tech Syndicate, who has a really powerful 16-core CPU from the AM4 range, and then 64 gigs of DDR4 RAM running at 3600 MHz. The GPU is an RTX 3080 Ti from Asus TUF Gaming. It's got a B550 motherboard, and then everything's packed into a really small case, the Silenso S400. And Logan hasn't felt the need to upgrade this build yet, and to be honest, I get that. In terms of the monitor setup, Logan has 4 monitors, and yes, I know there's only 3 here. The main one is the Alienware in the center. There's then a portrait Lenovo on the left, and a really old Dell, which is very old and bulky, but the vertical pixels 1600 of the Dell matches the Alienware, so that actually makes really good sense for this 3-monitor setup. But what about the 4th one? Well, Logan is old school and has a CRT monitor, which they use for retro gaming, or sometimes actually playing modern games on a CRT, which is really cool. I really like that style. So that wraps up the specs for these 10 creators. I'm personally really grateful I was able to give these small channels a little bit of extra exposure. Kidding, totally kidding. No, I'm really happy they took pity on me and actually got back to me with all of this really useful information, because I feel like this has been a really good video. I hope you agree, and if you did, please click the thumbs up button and please subscribe to see more videos like this. Thanks for watching.